Welcome back. I'm Dr. Cheek and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Have any of you ever heard the saying, what we fear is what we create? Also, have you ever found yourself engaging in behaviors that are counter to or goes against everything you're trying to achieve in life and every goal you're trying to make? If so, then you've probably experienced self-sabotage. And self-sabotaging behaviors are behaviors that we engage in that defeats the overall goal that we're trying to achieve in life. And we sometimes feel like those behaviors are outside of our control. We feel like we have this impulse to engage in this way, although we know it's getting us further and further away from those goals. There are areas in our lives and ways in our lives that we tend to self-sabotage. So when we're thinking about a work situation, we self-sabotage by not completing projects on time, by not coming to work on time, by constantly being late for work, by also having or engaging in combative relationships with coworkers or with leadership. In education, we self-sabotage by not completing our assignment, turning assignments in late, not attending class, not studying or putting efforts into completing or doing assignments. In relationships, we self-sabotage by causing or engaging in conflicts that may or may not have merit. We also aren't engaged in the relationship. We may be very standoffish or cold or not engaged in the relationship. We may come off as emotionally detached or disconnected from the relationship. When it comes to health or healthy ways of being, we may self-sabotage by eating a poor diet or not exercising or not going to seek medical attention when we're having things going on with us as far as our health is concerned. And lastly, we may self-sabotage in therapy. And ways that we self-sabotage in therapy is that we either lie by omission or we lie outright to our therapist about what we're feeling and what we're experiencing and what we're going through. And sometimes we will maintain therapeutic relationships with providers that we know aren't really helping us get to the next level. So those are ways and areas of our lives that we tend to self-sabotage. Now, why do we do this? Why do we engage in behaviors that are counter to everything we're trying to achieve? Some of the reasons that we tend to engage in self-sabotage is because we have low self-esteem. We don't feel worthy. We don't feel like we're deserving. We don't feel like we actually are able to achieve that particular goal. Another reason is we have a fear of success. So what happens if I complete this goal? What happens if I achieve this goal? What happens if my struggle has been what has been defining me? If I'm able to be successful, then what's next? Also, we self-sabotage based off previous experiences. So if we had like a previous negative experience with relationships or work experiences, we may take that attitude, that thought process, and that way of looking at this new employment situation as it's similar to the previous employment situation, when in actuality there is no similarities, but we're just using that previous experience to dictate what's going to happen next. So, how do we correct this behavior? What do we need to do differently in order to stop self-sabotaging? Number one, bring awareness and start to identify when you're engaging in these behaviors. Start to be able to call yourself to the carpet and call yourself out when you're doing behaviors that are counter to everything you're trying to achieve. Second is start to identify, what fear is this tapping into for me? Is it tapping into my fear of being a success? Is it tapping into my fear of having imposter syndrome? Is it tapping into my fear of me getting into this new relationship and this person treating me the same way my last relationship partner did? What fear is this tapping into for myself? And lastly, you have one or two options. You can either decide to allow that fear to dictate how you behave, and you can behave however it is that the driving emotion in that moment is causing you to behave, or you can decide in that moment, this is not going to allow me to achieve the goal that I'm trying to reach. So let me first deal with that emotion that I'm feeling on a level where I can understand what's driving that emotion. And let me then decide how I want to respond based not solely on that emotion, but also on what I want to achieve. What is my overall goal in this relationship, in this work environment, and my education, and my overall health? What behavior would allow me to achieve that goal, or what behavior would take into consideration my previous experiences and my valid or maybe invalid fear that I'm having fulfilling, but also still doesn't completely defeat my overall life goal. So the idea of what we fear is what we create basically means that when we allow our fears to dictate how we behave, the things that we're trying to avoid are the main things that will likely occur because of our own behaviors. So let's take education, for example. Now in graduate school is a hard process. So when you're in graduate school, there is a lot of work that's required for you to do day in and day out. And there are times that you don't have the bandwidth to also be social while doing work. So if you fear being kicked out of your graduate school program because you're not adequate enough, because you don't feel good enough, because you feel like you don't belong or that you were chosen for any other reason outside of your academic prowess, there is a chance that if that's what you fear, if you behave based off that fear, you may not turn your assignments in. You may turn your assignments in late. You may make excuses as to why your professor is not willing to take these late assignments. You may not come to class on time. You may not come to class consistently. You may not do all the things that you need to do in order to prepare and adequately pass your courses. And eventually, because you're not putting the effort in, you will create your dismissal from that program. So this is why we sometimes say, well, what we fear is what we create. So I want you to ask yourself, are you allowing your fears to dictate what your behavior is moving forward in these life goals? Or are you taking the time to kind of take stock into what you're fearing, especially when your behaviors seem counter to everything you're trying to achieve? Do you take notice of those behaviors and say, why am I behaving in this way? Well, what's driving those behaviors? What's driving those behaviors may be fear. And if that's the case, start to identify that, acknowledge that, and purposely make those changes. I hope you have learned some information from today's video. If you have any questions or comments, jot them down below. I thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'll be seeing you again soon.